The grand hall of Ashford Court glittered with 1,000 candles as vampires from across Europe gathered for the most important ceremony in 2 centuries. And Lady Ashford stood at the center of it all with a smile that did not reach her cold eyes. Tonight, she would finally declare her grandson Iseo Jinha dead after 200 years of absence. And his inheritance would pass to a distant cousin she could control like a puppet on strings. The ancient vampires whispered among themselves about the lost prince who had vanished one night without explanation, leaving behind only a short letter that said he could not live this life anymore. Lady Ashford had searched for him for decades before giving up, and now she was ready to erase his memory from the family records forever. But thousands of miles away in a small fishing village on the coast of South Korea, the prince everyone thought was dead woke up before dawn to prepare breakfast for his children. Seo Jinha looked nothing like the pampered noble he had once been. With his simple clothes and calloused hands from years of pulling fishing nets, but his pale skin and sharp features still marked him as something other than human. He moved quietly through the small house so he would not wake his son and daughter, cracking eggs into a pan and slicing vegetables with practiced ease. The walls were covered with drawings made by small hands, pictures of fish and boats, and a family of 3 holding hands under a bright. Soon a photo frame sat on the shelf showing a beautiful woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. And Jinha paused to look at it as he did every morning. Park Yuna had been gone for 3 years now, taken by an illness that no vampire power could cure. And Jinha still felt her absence like a wound that would never fully heal. She had known what he was from the beginning and loved him anyway, giving him 2 children and 15 years of happiness that were worth more than the centuries he had spent in the cold halls of Ashford Court. "Appa, I am hungry," a small voice said, and Jinha turned to see his 8-year-old son Minho standing in the doorway rubbing his eyes. "Breakfast is almost ready," Jinha said with a smile that transformed his stern face into something warm and fatherly. Minho climbed into his chair at the small table, and a moment later his 6-year-old sister Heian appeared, dragging a stuffed rabbit behind her. The 2 children looked like their mother with their round faces and bright eyes. But Minho had inherited his father's sharp reflexes and unusual strength and showed no vampire traits at all, appearing completely human in every way. But Jinha loved them both equally and fiercely. They ate together as the sun rose over the ocean, talking about school and friends and the new fishing boat that old man Kim had bought. It was a peaceful life, simple and quiet. Everything that Jinha had dreamed of when he fled the scheming and cruelty of vampire politics 200 years ago. He had refused an arranged marriage to a vampire princess he did not love, a union meant to strengthen political alliances between ancient bloodlines. His grandmother had raged at him for weeks, calling him selfish and ungrateful. And one night Jinha had simply walked away from everything he had ever known. He never regretted that choice, not once in 2 centuries, especially not when he looked at his children and remembered the love he had shared with Yuna. But peace never lasts forever, and the danger Jinha had always feared finally found them on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Minho was walking home from school with his sister when a car came speeding around a corner too fast, heading straight for a classmate who had dropped her books in the street. Minho did not think. He just moved, crossing the distance in a blur of impossible speed and pushing the girl out of the way. Before the car could hit her, everyone saw it happen. A dozen witnesses staring with wide eyes at the boy who had moved faster than any human. Minho realized his mistake immediately, his face going pale as the whispers started around him. That night, Jinha held his frightened son and told him it was not his fault, that he had saved a life and should be proud. But fear was already growing in his heart. He knew how the world worked, knew that there were people who hunted creatures like him and his children. The vampire hunters found them 3 days later, came at midnight when the children were sleeping. 6 of them armed with silver weapons and ultraviolet lights. Jinha heard them before they reached the house, and he woke his children quickly, pushing them into the hidden cellar he had built for exactly this purpose. "Stay here and do not make a sound," he told them, his voice calm even as his eyes burned with a dangerous light. Then he went to meet the hunters, and for the first time in 200 years, the Lost Prince of Ashford Court showed what he could do. The fight was brutal and fast, Jinha tearing through the hunters with a speed and savagery that shocked even himself. He had spent 2 centuries pretending to be human, almost forgetting what he truly was. But his children were in danger, and nothing could stand against a father protecting his family when it was over. 3 hunters lay dead, and the others fled into the night. And Jinha stood in his ruined home with blood on his hands. He knew they would come back with more people and better weapons. Knew that this quiet life he had built was destroyed forever. There was only one place in the world where his children would be safe from hunters. One power strong enough to protect half-vampire children from those who wanted them dead. He would have to return to Ashford Court and claim his birthright. Not for power or glory, but simply to keep his family alive. Jinha packed what little they had while his children watched with frightened eyes. And he knelt down to look at them both. "We are going on a long trip," he said gently, "to meet your great-grandmother and the rest of our family. Will it be safe there?" "Appa," Minho asked, and Jinha wished he could lie. "I will make it safe," he promised instead. And that was the only truth he could offer. 2 days later, they boarded a plane to Europe, leaving behind the only home the children had ever known. The lost vampire Heir was finally going home, and he was bringing 2 half-human children that would shake the ancient court to its foundations. The Ashford estate rose from the English countryside like a dark dream, its ancient towers reaching toward a cloudy sky as the taxi brought Jinha and his children up the long driveway. Minho pressed his face against the window with wide eyes while Heian clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter, and Jinha felt his stomach twist with emotions. He had buried for 200 years. Nothing had changed about the place where he grew up. Not the stone walls or the iron gates or the feeling of cold power that hung in the air like mist guards in dark suits watched them approach with suspicious eyes, speaking into hidden radios as they recognized the face of the prince who had vanished so long ago. The timing could not have been more dramatic, because inside the grand hall, Lady Ashford was just beginning the ceremony to declare her grandson dead. She stood on a raised platform in a gown of black silk, surrounded by hundreds of vampires who had come to witness the end of an era. "Tonight we close a painful chapter in our family history," she was saying, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "And we look toward a new future with fresh leadership who—" The massive doors swung open with a boom that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Every head turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. A man with sharp features and tired eyes carrying a small girl on his back and holding a young boy by the hand. Lady Ashford's words died in her throat as she stared at the grandson she had been about to declare dead. "I hope I am not too late," Jinha said, walking forward through the crowd that parted before him like water around a stone. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the hall like wildfire. "Is that really him? Who are those children? Are they human? They smell human." Jinha stopped at the foot of the platform and looked up at his grandmother, seeing the shock behind her carefully controlled expression. "Grandmother," he said, "I have returned to claim my birthright as heir to Ashford Court." Lady Ashford recovered quickly, because she had not survived for 800 years by letting surprise control her. "Jinha," she said, her voice smooth as silk. What a pleasant surprise after 2 centuries of silence. Her eyes moved to the children, and Jinha saw the calculation in her gaze. "And who are these little ones you have brought to our sacred hall?" "My children," Jinha said clearly so everyone could hear. "Seo Minho and Seo, born of my union with a human woman." The hall exploded into chaos. Vampires shouted in outrage and disbelief, because half-blood children were considered abominations by the oldest traditions, unworthy of standing in the presence of pure bloodlines. But Jinha stood firm with his children pressed close to his legs. And when he spoke again, his voice cut through the noise like a blade. By ancient law, a direct heir cannot be denied entry to the court, and I invoke the right of sanctuary for myself and my blood. Lady Ashford's fingers tightened on the railing of the platform. Because he was right, and she knew it. The old laws were clear, written in a time when family bonds meant more than politics, and not even she could break them in front of so many witnesses very well. She said with a smile that promised pain later, "Welcome home, grandson, and welcome to your children as well." She gestured to a servant with barely hidden fury, ordering rooms to be prepared for the unexpected guests. The ceremony was over, her careful plans ruined in a single moment. But Lady Ashford was patient, and she would find a way to fix this problem. Later that night, a knock came at Jinna's door, and he opened it to find a face he had not seen in 200 years. Kang Do-yoon had been his closest friend in childhood, a boy from a lesser vampire family who had trained beside him and shared his secrets and dreams. Now Do-hyun was a tall man with a stern face and the uniform of a HFY court enforcer, but his eyes held the same warmth. Jinha remembered from long ago. "You actually came back," Do-hyun said quietly. "I never thought I would see you again. I never planned to return," Jinha admitted. But circumstances changed. Do-hyun looked past him to where Minho and Haeyeon were sleeping in a large bed, curled together like puppies, half-blood children, he said. And there was no judgment in his voice, only wonder. "You always did like to make things difficult." They talked for hours in whispers, catching up on 2 centuries of separation. And Do-hyun told Jinha everything he needed to know about the current state of the court. Lady Ashford had grown more powerful and more ruthless over the years, eliminating rivals and building a network of loyal followers. There were factions who believed in vampire purity above all else, who would see Jinna's children as threats to be eliminated. "You need to be careful," Do-hyun warned. "There are already people talking about how convenient it would be if your children had accidents." Jinna's eyes went dark with a dangerous light that made his old friend step back. "If anyone touches my children," he said softly, "I will burn this court to the ground and everyone in it." The next few weeks were difficult for everyone. Minho tried to make friends among the young vampires of the court, but they mocked him and called him tainted blood. Pushing him and tripping him in the hallway, Shan was ignored completely because she showed no vampire traits at all, treated as if she was invisible and worthless. Jinho watched his children suffer and felt his hatred for this place growing stronger every day. He attended council meetings and listened to elders talk about bloodlines and tradition, all while plotting against each other behind polite smiles. One night he heard voices through a door that should have been closed, and he stopped to listen. "The half-bloods cannot be allowed to inherit," someone was saying. "They will pollute everything our ancestors built. Then we must act," another voice replied. "Children are fragile, and accidents happen so easily." Jinha memorized the voices and walked away with murder in his heart, knowing that sanctuary meant nothing if his children could be quietly killed. There was only one way to protect them, one path that would put him beyond the reach of assassins and schemers. The next morning, he stood before the full court and made an announcement that shocked everyone present. "I will undergo the trial of blood," he declared, "to prove my worth as the true heir of Ashford." Lady Ashford's face went pale, because the trial was ancient and brutal, and no one had survived it in 500 years. But she could not refuse him, because the old laws gave every heir the right to attempt the trial. "Very well," she said, hiding her fear behind a cold smile. "May your blood prove worthy." Jinha looked at his children sitting in the gallery with Dongyun watching over them. And he knew he would either pass this trial or die trying. There was no other choice for a father who would do anything to protect his family. The Trial of Blood was an ancient test created in the earliest days of vampire history. When bloodlines were young and heirs needed to prove their strength to lead it, consisted of 3 challenges that would push a vampire to the very edge of death. And the last person to survive all 3 had done so 500 years. Agajina spent his days preparing in the training halls, pushing his body and mind to their limits while trying not to think about what failure would mean for his children. But while he trained, his children faced their own battles in the cruel world of the vampire court. Minho was walking through the gardens one afternoon when a group of young nobles surrounded him, their eyes cold with hatred and disgust. Half-blood, their leader sneered. A boy named Victor who came from one of the oldest families. You do not belong here with your tainted human blood. Leave me alone, Minho said, trying to walk away. But they blocked his path. Make us, Victor said, shoving him hard. Show us what your weak human blood can do. The other boys laughed and joined in, pushing Minho back and forth between them like a toy. Minho could feel his vampire strength rising, could feel the urge to fight back. But his father had warned him to control himself and not give them reasons to hate him more. Then one of the boys grabbed his mother's necklace, a simple silver chain that Minho wore hidden under his shirt, and yanked it hard enough to break the clasp. Why is this? Victor laughed, holding up the necklace. A gift from your dead human mother. Something inside Minho snapped, and he lunged at Victor with a snarl. But the other boys grabbed him and held him down. Pathetic, Victor said, dangling the necklace just out of reach. Just like the human woman who gave birth to you. Stop it, a small voice said. And everyone turned to see Heian standing at the edge of the garden with her stuffed rabbit in her arms. Victor laughed at the tiny girl with no vampire powers. The one everyone called worthless runaway, little human. Before you get hurt too, give back my brother's necklace, Heian said. And there was something strange in her voice. Something that made the air feel heavy and cold. Or what? Victor asked, stepping toward her with a cruel smile. Heian's eyes changed, the dark brown of her irises turning silver like moonlight on water. And a wave of invisible force exploded outward from her small body. The noble boys were thrown backward through the air, landing hard on the ground 10 feet away. And Victor dropped the necklace as he crashed into a stone bench. The silver light faded from Heian's eyes, and she swayed on her feet. Confused and frightened by what had just happened, Minho scrambled up and ran to his sister, catching her as she collapsed. While the noble boys stared at her with a new kind of fear, guards came running at the commotion. And within hours the whole court knew what had happened. The half-blood girl with no vampire powers had done something impossible. Something that had not been seen in 300 years. Lady Ashford summoned her scholars, and they confirmed what she already suspected. Heian was a seer, born with the ancient gift of seeing fate itself. Seers were rare and precious, their abilities considered purer and more valuable than any physical vampire trait. And now one had emerged in the family of half-bloods everyone despised. The court's attitude toward the children shifted overnight. But Jinha knew this only made them more valuable as pawns to be controlled. He pushed himself harder in training, knowing he had even more reason now to pass the trial and secure his power. The first challenge was the test of strength, where Jinha had to fight 3 elder vampires, one after another without rest. He won through skill and determination, using 2 centuries of survival experience to defeat opponents who had grown slow and arrogant in their comfortable lives. The second challenge was the test of mind, where he was locked in a chamber of illusions, designed to drive him mad with visions of his greatest fears and failures. He saw Yuna dying again and again, saw his children killed in 100 different ways, saw himself powerless to protect anyone he loved. But Jinha had already lived through the worst pain imaginable when he held his wife's hand as she took her final breath. And no illusion could break a man who had survived. Then he emerged from the chamber after 3 days, thinner and pale, but with his mind intact. The night before the final challenge, Lady Ashford came to his room with an offer. "Withdraw from the trial," she said, her voice almost gentle. "Let your children be raised properly as court members under my guidance, and I will guarantee their safety." Jinha looked at the grandmother who had never shown him love, only expectations and demands. And he saw the hunger for control beneath her smooth words. "You want to turn them into weapons for your political games," he said. "Just like you tried to do with me." "I want to preserve our family legacy," she replied. "Something you clearly do not care about." "I care about my children," Jinha said. "And I will never hand them to someone who sees them as tools instead of people." Lady Ashford's gentle mask cracked for a moment, showing the cold fury beneath. "Then you will die in the trial," she said. "And I will raise your children my way regardless. We will see," Jinha replied, and he turned his back on her. A dismissal that made her ancient pride burn with rage. The final test was the test of sacrifice, held in the Chamber of Ancestors where the spirits of dead Ashfords lingered in the shadows. No one knew exactly what the test required, because it was different for everyone, and those who survived rarely spoke of it. Jinha entered the chamber alone at midnight, walking into darkness that swallowed him completely inside. The spirits of his ancestors surrounded him with whispers of judgment and questions that cut to his soul. "What will you give?" they asked. "What is your sacrifice?" The magic of the trial reached into his heart and found what he valued most: time. The endless centuries of immortal life that vampires cherished above all else. "Your children will live protected under court law," the spirit said. "If you give up what you are, if you surrender your immortality and accept the death that humans know." Jinha did not hesitate, did not ask for a different price, did not beg for mercy. "I accept," he said. And pain beyond anything he had ever known tore through his body as the ancient magic took its payment when the chamber doors opened at dawn. Jinha stumbled out into the light with hair turned completely white and a limp that would never heal, but his eyes held the unmistakable mark of completion. And every vampire present bowed their head. The lost prince had passed the trial of blood. He was now the true and undisputed heir of Ashford Court. And his children were finally safe under the protection of laws that no one could break. The weeks after Jinha's victory brought changes that rippled through Ashford Court like stones dropped in still water. His children were now recognized as legitimate members of the bloodline, protected by ancient laws that made harming them punishable by death. Minho walked the halls with his head held higher, and Heir began training with old scholars who taught her to understand her seer abilities, but not everyone accepted the new reality. And dark forces were gathering in the shadows. A group of vampire purists called the Pure Circle had existed for centuries, believing that vampire blood must never be mixed with human weakness. They saw half-blood children in the succession line as an insult to everything their ancestors had built, a corruption that had to be cleansed. Their leader was an ancient vampire named Lord Morton, who had survived for 1,000 years by never showing his true face to anyone. He met in secret with his followers, speaking of tradition and purity, while planning something far more terrible. Lady Ashford played her own game, more subtle than the Pure Circle, but no less dangerous. She visited the children often, bringing gifts of toys and sweets, telling them stories of the family history that painted their father as selfish and irresponsible. He abandoned his duty to run away with a human woman, she told them sweetly, leaving the family to suffer without an heir for 200 years. Heir listened with quiet eyes that saw more than a child should. But Minho was young enough to feel confused by his grandmother's words. Jinha watched his grandmother's manipulation with growing anger. But he knew confronting her directly would only make things worse. He needed allies. And the only person he could truly trust was his old friend Do-hyun, but Do-hyun was facing his own crisis. Because Lady Ashford had ordered him to spy on Jinha and report everything for weeks. Do-hyun struggled between his loyalty to the court that had raised him and his bond with the friend he had never forgotten. Finally, he came to Jinha's room late one night with fear and shame in his eyes. "They ordered me to watch you," he confessed, "to tell them your plans and weaknesses so they can use them against you." Jinha had already suspected this, because he knew how the court worked better than anyone. "And what have you told them?" he asked quietly. "Nothing important," Do-hyun said. "But I cannot keep lying forever. They will realize soon that I am not loyal to them." "Then stop lying to them," Jinha said, "and start being loyal to me instead." It was a risk to trust anyone in this place of schemes and betrayals. But Jinha needed someone who could move through the court without suspicion. Do-hyun became his eyes and ears, warning him of plots and dangers while pretending to serve Lady Ashford's interests. Seer Council sent representatives to evaluate Heir, a group of ancient vampires who existed outside normal court politics. They wanted to take her away for special training, claiming that her gifts were too important to be developed without their Guadanchina refused them politely but firmly. Knowing that children who went to the Seer Council rarely returned to their families, the representatives left with cold promises to discuss the matter further. And Jinha added them to the list of enemies he had to watch. But the greatest danger came from the Pure Circle, who had decided that waiting and plotting was no longer enough. They made their move during the Winter Festival, when the whole court gathered for celebration and the guards were distracted by crowds and noise. Minho had wandered away from his father to watch a group of performers. Fascinated by their acrobatic tricks, he did not notice the servants who moved closer to him. Did not realize anything was wrong until a cloth covered his face and darkness took him. When Minho woke up, he was in a cold stone room, chained to a wall with silver that burned his half-vampire skin. Lord Morton stood before him with a face that showed no emotion, only the calm certainty of someone about to do something they believed was right. "Your existence is an insult to our blood," the ancient vampire said. "But do not be afraid, little one. This is a mercy. I am cleansing the corruption before it can spread." Minho was terrified, but he did not beg or cry, because he was his father's son and he would face death with courage. Back at the festival, Jinha noticed his son's absence and felt cold fear grip his heart. He found Do-hyun immediately, and together they questioned everyone who had been near Minho before he vanished. A servant broke under Jinha's interrogation, revealing the location of the Pure Circle's hidden sanctuary beneath an abandoned church outside the city. Jinha did not wait for guards or permission or any kind of official response. He went alone, moving through the night like a shadow of death. And he found the church. Within an hour inside were a dozen Pure Circle members who thought they were safe in their secret place, who had forgotten what the Lost Prince was truly capable of. Jinha had spent 200 years living among humans, pretending to be weak and harmless, but he had never forgotten how to kill. He came through the door like a storm of fury, faster than any of them expected, stronger than any of them believed possible. 3 vampires died in the first 10 seconds. Their heads separated from their bodies before they could even scream. The others tried to fight back, but Jinha was already among them. A whirlwind of claws and fangs that left nothing but destruction. Lord Morton fled through a back passage, but Jinha caught him before he reached the exit. "Please," the ancient vampire begged. "I was only protecting our traditions. You must understand." Jinha broke his neck without a word and let the body fall. He found Minho in the basement, chained and burned but alive, and he tore the silver away with his bare hands, even as it seared his flesh. "Appa," Minho whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I knew you would come. Always," Jinho promised, holding his son close. "I will always come for you." He carried Minho back to the court as dawn approached. Walking through the front gates covered in blood and ash, the vampires who saw him stepped back in fear. Because this was not the soft prince who had run away to live with humans. This was something far more dangerous. A father who had killed 12 vampires to save his child and would kill 1,000 more. If anyone threatened his family again, word spread quickly through the court. The half-blood children were no longer easy targets. Anyone who touched them would face a monster wearing the face of a gentle fisherman, and Lady Ashford, watching from her tower window, realized for the first time that her grandson might be more than she could control. The massacre at the Pure Circle Sanctuary sent shockwaves through vampire society that reached far beyond Ashford Court. Lord Morton had been an elder of great influence, and his death, along with 11 of his followers, could not be ignored or hidden. The council demanded answers. And for the first time, Lady Ashford found herself on the defensive. 2 of her closest allies were revealed to be Pure Circle members. Vampires who had stood beside her for centuries while secretly plotting against her own grandson. Her reputation for knowing everything that happened in her court was shattered, and whispers began spreading that perhaps she was losing her grip on power. Jinho saw his opportunity and seized it with both hands. He called for a formal vote of no confidence in Lady Ashford's leadership, invoking an ancient rite that had not been used in 400 years. The court divided into factions almost immediately, with traditionalists supporting Lady Ashford and reformers seeing a chance for change. Jinho did not promise revolution or the destruction of old ways, because he understood that fear of change was his greatest enemy. Instead, he spoke of survival and adaptation, pointing to the declining vampire population and the weakening bloodlines caused by centuries of isolation. "We hide in shadows while the human world grows stronger every year," he told the assembled council. "We cling to traditions that served our ancestors, but are killing our children." He gestured to Minho and Hyon, who sat watching from the gallery with Diane standing guard behind them. "My children are called abominations by those who cannot see the truth, but they represent what we could become, stronger than humans, but connected to the world instead of hiding from it." Lady Ashford answered with honey-sweet words about tradition and stability, warning that change would bring chaos and destruction. But her support was crumbling, and she could feel power slipping through her fingers like water. She played her final card on the morning of the vote, announcing that she had reached an agreement with the Seer Council. "The girl Hyon will be taken for proper training," she declared, "under the guidance of those who understand her gifts. This arrangement ensures her powers will serve the family as they should." She produced documents with official seals, contracts signed without Jinho's knowledge or consent. The Seer Council representatives stepped forward to claim Hyon, reaching for the small girl who had caused so much upheaval. Jinho moved to stop them, but Lady Ashford's guards blocked his path. "The papers are legal," she said with triumph in her eyes. "There is nothing you can do." Then Hyon spoke, and her voice was not the voice of a 6-year-old child. It was deeper and older, carrying the weight of something ancient and powerful. And everyone in the hall fell silent to listen. "I have seen what is coming," she said, her eyes glowing silver with the light of prophecy. 2 futures stretched before this court like roads through darkness. She turned slowly, looking at each vampire in turn as if she could see into their souls. In one future, those who embrace change grow stronger with each generation. They walk in sunlight and shadow both, feared and respected by all who know them. Her gaze moved to Lady Ashford, and the ancient vampire felt a chill she had not experienced in 800 years. In the other future, those who cling to hatred crumble to dust. their names forgotten, their bloodlines ended, their traditions buried in graves that no one visits. The silver light intensified, and Heian raised her small hand to point at her father. This man gave up what vampires value most, so his children could live protected. He surrendered his immortality in the trial of blood, accepting the death that humans know so that we might have a future. Gasps echoed through the hall, because no one had known what Jinha sacrificed in the Chamber of Ancestors. The lost prince who had seemed so selfish had given up eternal life for his children, trading endless centuries for perhaps a few hundred years at most. Lady Ashford's face went pale as she realized how badly she had misjudged her grandson. She had thought him weak and soft, but he had made a sacrifice she could never imagine. Making herself, the Seer Council representatives withdrew their hands from Heian, bowing their heads in respect. A seer of such power cannot be confined, their leader said. She will be trained, but she will remain with her family as she chooses. The vote proceeded, and one by one the council members declared their support for Jinhe. And vampires who had opposed him could not stand against the combined weight of his sacrifice, and his daughter's prophecy. Lady Ashford was removed. As elder by a margin of nearly 3-1, she stood alone as her power crumbled, and for the first time in centuries, she looked every one of her 800 years. You have won, she said to Jinha, a voice empty of everything except exhaustion. I hope you understand what you have taken on. I understand better than you ever did, Jinha replied. And there was no hatred in his voice, only sadness for the grandmother, who had never learned to love. Lady Ashford left the court that night, retreating to a distant estate where she would spend her remaining years in isolation. Jinha was declared the new Lord of Ashford Court, and his first act was to abolish the laws that declared half-bloods as lesser beings. His children stood beside him as he made the proclamation. Minho, with his mother's necklace repaired and hanging around his neck. Heian, with her stuffed rabbit still clutched in one hand. The years that followed brought changes that transformed vampire society in ways no one could have predicted. Minho grew into a young man who served as a bridge between vampires and humans, using his dual nature to build alliances that made both races stronger. Heian's visions guided the court through dangers that would have destroyed them, her silver eyes seeing paths through darkness that others could not imagine. Jinha watched his children flourish and felt pride that filled every corner of his heart. His hair remained white and his limp never healed, reminders of the price he had paid in the Chamber of Ancestors. He aged now, slowly but visibly, lines appearing on his face that would never have marked a true immortal. Sometimes late at night, he would take out the photograph of Yuna and talk to her about their children, about the amazing people they had become. I wish you could see them, he would whisper. They have your kindness and my stubbornness, and they are changing the world. 20 years after the vote that made him Lord, Jinha stood on a balcony watching the sun rise over the estate. Minho and Heian joined him. No longer children, but adults who carried the future of their people on their shoulders. Do you ever regret it? Minho asked. Giving up forever to protect us. Jinha looked at his son, then at his daughter, then at the world that was brighter than it had ever been because of what they had built together. I gave up forever, he said, with a smile that held no trace of regret. But I gained something worth more than all the centuries I could have lived. He put his arms around his children and held them close as the sun painted the sky in colors of gold and rose. I gained a family, he said, and that was worth everything. The lost vampire heir had finally found his home, not in the ancient halls of power, but in the hearts of the children he loved more than immortality itself.